Welcome back, Horror Fam, to day 18 of our Halloween countdown. Tonight's theme is all about the hidden dangers of sleep, with two terrifying stories that will have you rethinking what happens when you close your eyes. First up, we have The Dream Man, a chilling story about a nightmare figure who haunts a young boy's dreams. And then there's No Sleep, a short but terrifying tale about, well, you'll just have to see. So grab your blankets, but be warned, sleep might not come so easily after these stories. Get ready for a night of sleepless terror.
Think back to when you were a child. You probably had some silly thing you were afraid of. Some ridiculous, imaginary boogeyman that haunted your nightmares. But you grew out of it, and soon enough you didn't need a nightlight to chase away the monster anymore. Except, sometimes, that boogeyman isn't imaginary. I know mine wasn't. It all started when I was 4 or 5. My parents and I lived in this old house in a small town. I didn't really have many friends in the area, so naturally, I spent most of my free time exploring the house and playing little make-believe games by myself. There was one part of the house I refused to go in, though. The basement. For whatever reason, I was convinced that there was something living down there. And it would get me if I ventured down there. I wasn't as wrong as you'd think. Now, before I go any further, I will admit that I was a bit of a coward as a kid. So nightmares were a fairly regular occurrence. But most of the time, I could tell that I was dreaming, so I didn't make too much of them. These dreams that I'm going to tell you about were different. They felt absolutely real, and given what happened, they very well might have been. Like I said, I was just a little tyke when I started dreaming about the old man. I still remember every little detail, even today. Especially today, in fact. I remember, in the first dream, it was a beautiful summer day, and I was out and about, riding my bike in the driveway, and generally not having a care in the world. My parents were outside, watching me, and as far as I cared, everything was perfect as it could be. Suddenly, I felt an icy wind blow over me, and my bike just sort of locked up. I began rolling, slowly, backwards along the driveway. I was unable to slow the bike down, or even get off it. I began looking around in a panic, trying to see what was going on. That's when I saw him for the first time. The old man. He was dressed sharply, like an old-fashioned nobleman. He was tall and odd. His skin was pale. He had these terrifying eyes, and a disturbing smile. Being so young, I was unable to articulate exactly what I saw when I looked into the cold, dead eyes of what we came to call the Dream Man. Even as a grown man, I still can't. What I saw was simply too alien, too inhuman. Some thing's poor attempt at feigning humanity. I didn't waste any time. As soon as I saw that horrible thing, I tried to run. But I still couldn't even manage to get off my bicycle. I turned to scream for my parents, only to find they weren't there anymore. Not that they could have done anything anyways. I slid backwards, right into the arms of the old man, his horrible eyes staring at me. I felt a freezing numbness as his long, bony fingers grasped my arm, his dirty claw-like nails digging into my flesh. I remember how the old man leaned in close, breaking away from his bizarre smile just long enough to whisper one word to me. Cellar. The next thing I knew, I was being shaken awake by my parents, as I had actually been screaming in my sleep. I told them about what happened, and they told me it was just a nightmare. I believed them. Every so often, I would have nightmares about the man, but since they were only dreams, my parents didn't think much of them. That is, until I started sleepwalking. As bad as my first encounter with the Dream Man was, the worst had yet to come. The Dream Man was always the same. It always started off with me in my room, playing, when I would suddenly get a sense of wrongness about my surroundings. An urgency I couldn't shake. I would go off to find my parents, but no matter where I looked, I couldn't find them. When I would go to the hallway where the door to the basement was, I would hear someone calling me. When I would turn around to see where the sound came from, the basement door would swing open, and there would be the old man beckoning me, calling me without moving his lips, locked onto me with his unblinking stare. I was powerless. I could do nothing but march towards him, screaming silently in my mind as my limbs jerkily dragged me along against my will. A prisoner to my own body. Usually at this point, I'd be woken up by my parents. Somehow, I would sleepwalk all the way to the cellar door. They almost always caught me before I started to go down the stairs, but not always. One time, the old man managed to get me down to the basement. That's the only nightmare about the Dream Man that I don't entirely remember. I just remember that I was in the basement with him, and he gripped my leg in his icy dead grip, that vile grin on his face. I woke up in excruciating pain. Apparently, while sleepwalking, I fell down the stairs into the basement, breaking my leg in the process. After I got out of the hospital, my parents took me to see a psychologist who thought the nightmares and sleepwalking were stress-induced, stating my parents' constant arguing was probably to blame. But, just in case, I was prescribed a medication to help me sleep. Naturally, after what happened, sleep was the last thing I wanted to do, and being a little kid, I tried to stay awake forever. Obviously, this didn't work, but strangely enough, the nightmares sort of subsided. I mean, sure, the old man would regularly show up in my dream, terrifying me into consciousness, but he never forced me down to the basement again. So time passed, and a few years later, I was in 3rd grade, and had even managed to make a friend. Mike. Mike and I were more like brothers than anything else. We were two of a kind, inseparable. As similar as we were, we had one major difference. Mike was completely fearless, whereas I was absolutely terrified of 2 specific things: the Dream Man and the basement I'd come to associate with him. One day my parents gave in and allowed Mike to spend the weekend with us. We had a great time, playing video games, telling spooky stories. We even snuck into my dad's secret horror movie stash. But eventually, after all the spooky stuff we had seen and done, Mike suggested that we up the ante. We were going to go down to the basement to confront my fears. I begged Mike. I pleaded with him not to make me go down there. But he saw it as his duty as my best friend to break me free of this fear. And when Mike got an idea in his head, there was no dissuading him of it. I wish I could say what happened next was only a nightmare. It was just after midnight. We crept down the stairs into the basement, armed with flashlights and, in my case, a wiffle ball bat. We spent about half an hour down there, looking in every corner for the aged ghoul who had haunted my dreams for so long. With no success, Mike smiled at me and told me I didn't have to be afraid anymore, and we decided to go back upstairs. That's when everything went to hell. Standing there, in the doorway, was the Dream Man, every bit as horrifying as he had been in my dreams. In one swift motion, he clamped his gnarled hands around my shoulder, and with one determined motion lifted me off the ground so we were eye to eye. Those nightmarish eyes of his filled my vision. I heard screaming, but I couldn't tell if it was coming from me or from Mike. I don't remember what happened after that. The next thing I knew, I was waking up on the cold, hard floor, and Mike was huddled in the corner shuddering, wide-eyed and pale, clutching the bat to his chest. For some time afterwards, I continuously asked him what happened, but he always refused to tell me. As time passed, we grew distant, as friends often do, and as Mike became more and more withdrawn, I always blamed myself. Whatever happened to us in that basement had changed him, and it was all my fault. Eventually, I stopped dreaming about the old man, and I managed to put the whole thing behind me. I went to college, met a great girl. We've been married now for 10 years, and everything's pretty great. Like I said, I managed to move on, and nearly managed to forget about the dream man. Until this morning, that is. At breakfast, my son told my wife and I about a dream he had last night. A dream about an old man in the basement, an old man with cold hands and terrifying eyes.
Finally finished. Now I just need to sit.
They say when you sleep, your soul from an alternate universe is awake. I've been awake for 4 days now. I wonder what happened. And I wonder if it's going to happen to me next.
And that wraps up day 18, Horror Fam. I hope tonight's stories left you feeling a little uneasy about falling asleep. From the haunting figure of the Dream Man to the chilling reality of no sleep. Sleep isn't always as safe as it seems. But don't worry, there's still plenty of scares in store as we continue our countdown to Halloween. Be sure to hit that notification bell, because this Halloween we're going to have a great stream of the classics. Until tomorrow, stay spooky, stay safe, and as always, take good care of yourselves.